Hello, Alex here, and in this video I want to share my thoughts on the Godox iM20, taking the core functionality of the iM30 and stripping it down for a simpler and maybe more elegant experience in a much smaller package with little compromise. Let's get into it. One of Godox's distributors, LetWell, partnered with me for my video on the Godox iM30, the compact universal flash, and that video was very well received. So much so that they sent me 2 more units in exchange for my reviews, so do bear in mind that bias. If you decide to purchase one of these flashes, LetWell's Amazon stores are linked in the video description down below for the various products that I'm looking at. And these aren't affiliate links, but please do consider buying it from LetWell if you're going to buy one, because they're the ones supporting me and making this video happen. Just like with my review of the iM30, most of the photos I'm going to show taken with the iM20 were shot on film, because I mostly shoot on film. I like my digital cameras, but film is just the thing for me, and with a film camera, you don't have a screen on the back, so you have to get your exposure right, and this being an all-manual flash, I want to show you that that's really not a big deal once you kind of learn what you're doing. I might talk about manual flash another day, because a few people have asked for that after the iM30 review. But on that note, a lot of the points in this video are going to echo the iM30 in a broad sense because they are relatively similar flashes, but the iM20 and 22 have some very unique traits, I think, that make them stand out in a certain market segment. Released in early 2025 by Godox, the iM20 is a compact flash that, like I said, is kind of just an iM30 without any of the fluff. It's a flash that goes on your camera to take pictures, and that's about it. This flash does have a counterpart, that being the iM22, and these are kind of a pair of flashes. It's the same set of internals in 2 different form factors depending on your aesthetic or camera needs, which I'll touch on later. This whole video is going to refer to the iM20, of course, but everything is going to apply equally to the iM20 or iM22 except for that one point that I'll make later. Retailing for about $34 or €38, both flashes are very affordable, and the iM20 is aesthetically reminiscent of the iM30 in a sense, but perhaps a bit more sleek and refined in its design. I won't speak about this in as much detail as in the iM30 video, which I do encourage you to watch, but for me there are 4 categories of flash, realistically, when it comes to actually using them. First, the micro flashes like the Reflx Lab Mini Flash, which are absolutely tiny. Then mini flashes like the iM20 or the iM30 that we're talking about today. Slightly bigger flashes with a bit more functionality like the Godox i832 or the Canon 155A, and now I can do this with all Godox flashes. And then full-size speed lights like the V863, which are significantly larger and have all the bells and whistles, so to speak. For me, the iM20, where is it, kind of blurs the line, I have too many flashes on my lap, blurs the line between the micro and mini flash category because it is, okay, quite a bit larger than the Reflx Lab Mini Flash, but it is significantly smaller than the iM30 with most of that power. It is a bit less powerful as we'll get into, but once I stopped thinking about this flash as a stripped down iM30, which in many ways it is, and I think it's fair to present it that way, but in terms of use as more of a turbocharged, slightly larger competitor to the Reflx Lab Mini Flash, oh, that's much, much more impressive. Inside the box you get the flash itself, a copy of the manual lacking any real charts, and an accessory box containing a soft pouch and a USB Type-A to Type-C cable. The flash only weighs about 30 grams and it comes in at 40 by 40 by 30 millimeters, so yeah, it is extremely compact and small even if there are smaller flashes available on the market. The outer housing is made from plastic and there is no flex at all. I didn't think that the iM30 was poorly made, but this feels significantly better in the hand. Like, the iM30 felt well made for its price, this feels disproportionately well made by comparison. It is very, very solid. The flash bulb is up front with a Fresnel and an estimated color temperature of about 6500 Kelvin, and in my testing that does match the iM30, so I'd say that's pretty much on par. The guide number of the flash is not specified in the manual or any documentation that I can find, so I tested it, and it feels like it's a bit less than 2 stops darker than the iM30 when both are at full power. So if the iM30 is about guide number 15, we're going to say this is about guide number 8. So it is about 2 stops weaker than the iM30, but it is hilariously more powerful than something like the Reflx Lab Mini Flash, which has a guide number of about 1.3. Even the Reflx Lab Simple Flash, which is over there behind the camera, has a guide number of about 3.2. So a guide number of 8 in a form factor this small is significantly more powerful, and you can see how I kind of reframed myself as this not being a weaker iM30, but a much more powerful ultra-compact flash. A guide number of 8 is going to be more than enough for most cases where you would be using like a simple on-camera flash anyway. Just like before, I made my own flash chart that you can grab on my website at shaka1277.com/flash, and this will apply equally to the iM22. The stated recycle time between full power flash pops is about 3 seconds, and I got 11 flash pops in 25 seconds, so a bit less than 2.5 seconds with no real idle time. So I think that's pretty much on par. It's what you would expect. And the coverage of the flash, basically how wide angle it can cover and fill the frame, feels like it's about the same as the iM30. So sort of 26 to 28 millimeters, pretty well. 35 and 50, definitely going to be covered. The top of the unit just features the iM20 name, and on the bottom you've got a single contact pin hot shoe with a friction fit plastic shoe with no locking ring. This flash is compatible with any camera that has a standard center pin on its hot shoe, and that is one of the bigger differences to the iM30. This camera doesn't have a PC sync port, nor does it have an optical sensor for wireless triggering. So it's pretty much just an on-camera flash, unless you're going to buy one of those PC sync adapters that are like nearly the size of the flash itself. So in a broad sense, this is purely an on-camera flash, and it's not compatible with cold shoe cameras, at least natively. There's nothing on the right-hand side of the flash except for the Godox logo, and on the left-hand side you've got a USB Type-C port for charging and a power button. Hold that button for a couple of seconds to turn the flash on, and then you can press it again to test fire. The flash is powered by an internal 3.8 volt cell with a 470 mAh capacity, promising 440 full power flash pops in between charges. It's supposed to take about 70 minutes, so a little over an hour, to fully recharge using the Type-C port, and I didn't time that. But I did try firing it to see how many flash pops I would get on a full charge, and I got from 5 bars down to 3 bars before I gave myself a headache. So 100% down to 60%, which gave me 184 full power flash pops, pretty much as fast as I could go. And it didn't overheat in that period, which is great, but that would extrapolate down to around about 460 something flashes on a full charge with no idle time. So 440 seems like a pretty reasonable estimate. The rear of the flash holds all that's left: a power minus button, 5 LEDs covering a 5-stop exposure range and 1-stop steps, and the power plus button. Holding the two of them together for a moment indicates the current battery charge level, and they do also flash and fill up the bar as you go when charging the unit, which is nicer to see than just like an on-off charging indicator light like so many things nowadays. At less than €40, the iM20 and iM22 are very affordable, and again, compared to the Reflx Lab Mini Flash, which I do like, but I feel like I'm constantly ragging on, it's like we're getting into like Wharf Effect territory, I think it presents much better value for money and probably the best on the market for someone who wants a really small flash without significantly compromising on power. Again, guide number of 8 versus like 1 to 3 for a lot of competing flashes. As I said, the build quality is extremely solid, and I think it is disproportionately good relative to the price. It is one of the best made cheap flashes I've ever felt, and in no way does the build quality betray its price. I could potentially give this to someone and they might think it's a 60 or 70 euro flash. The only thing I think people might be concerned about is not having a locking ring, which I did speak about with the Reflx Lab Mini Flash before, saying I would like to have like a friction pad on the bottom or some way to have a locking ring, but seeing the way it's implemented on some of these other flashes I have, it would add a lot of bulk. So I'm very happy to say that the friction fit here is very tight and very snug. This is obviously something you can just pull off the camera, but it's not going to accidentally pop off when you like pull it out of your bag, which is a problem I've had with the Reflx Lab Mini Flash, which has fallen off my camera on a couple of occasions. Although it is less powerful than the iM30, and I don't want to repeat myself too much here, the guide number of 8 is very good. You know, for the form factor, it's incredible, and it's more than good enough for what the average person is going to use an on-camera flash for. Are you going to illuminate an entire room? No. If you could, things like the V860 wouldn't need to exist. You know, you need power when you need power. The iM20 and iM22 are probably the most powerful flashes in that form factor segment, you know, that kind of blurry line between mini and micro flashes, at least under my own classification. And there's a lot to be said for that. You know, they bring a lot to the table, even if it is less than the iM30, it's probably going to be enough for you. And though it is less precise in the iM30, having only 5 power levels covering a 5-stop exposure range rather than 21 power levels covering a 7-stop exposure range, it's not that big of a deal. That is still significantly more options and versatility than you're going to have with something like most micro flashes. This has 5 power levels, most of them have 1, on or off, and it's more options than a lot of mini flashes like the Kex KF01. And being able to dial it down by a further 4 stops from its full power is, it gives you the ability to shoot wider open at closer distances and still not blow out your image. It's not as granular, but it's still realistically going to be fine. If I can shoot a flower close up with this kind of thing, it's going to be okay for most use cases. Lastly, it's a small thing, but I really like using the 5 rear LEDs to indicate the power level. It feels like everything these days has like an LCD on the back that gives you like a full battery icon, then a half battery icon, and then it turns red. And that's basically 3 power levels, or 3 charge levels. And this giving you, 20% increments is a small thing, but, not necessarily a given nowadays. So it's nice to see. Just like before with the iM30, this is an all manual flash with no automatic mode, no TTL protocol, nothing. You set the power level and you get it right or you get it wrong, and that's going to put a lot of people off. But I have to say, having seen the results and the commentary from the iM30 video, it's not just me. Manual flash is really not that big a deal, especially when we're talking about, like, to be fair, these relatively less powerful flashes. We're not talking about manually working out speedlight flash power. Those things work over much larger distances and broader ranges of things like the zoom head that make them a lot less practical for a normal person to work out. It is fair to say that some people are just not going to be interested in these because manual flash is not for them. Another common trait between these flashes and the iM30 is the color temperature being about 6500 Kelvin and leaning quite blue. In situations where you're mixing ambient light, like dialing the power down for fill flash, it can be, in certain cases, quite difficult to color grade because you're going to have quite blue light on your subject and potentially, say, like golden hour backlit sunset kind of pictures. Your subject is going to be bathed in very yellow golden light otherwise, and you might have to play around with that in post-production, which especially on film is problematic but may just be annoying to deal with masking in post on a digital camera. If you're using it more as your dominant flash, it's really not a problem, and just the way things have been here for the last couple of months, that is how I've been using this flash, and it's not a problem. This isn't something you're going to encounter all the time, but it is worth noting and repeating what I said before, that I would like to see these have a lower than daylight color temperature rather than higher, because that's going to be more usable in more circumstances. The iM20 is very short and stubby. It's a teeny tiny little flash, which means even illumination of your subject might not always be possible with very large lenses that physically block the cone of light coming out of the thing. The iM22 is a little bit taller. The flash bulb sits like a little bit less than 1.5 centimeters higher, and that does matter in certain cases. And this will also boil down to things like whether or not you have a prism viewfinder bump on the top of your camera or a flat boxy camera, and how big your lenses are, and what the field of view is, and a lot of factors. I'm not going to promise that the iM22 is going to be better, but in certain cases it will be, and it might be worth trying if you can get your hands on one. But personally, I prefer the boxy look. I've said this before, I said it about the iM30, and I think this flash is fine for me. For the 35 and 50mm lenses that I'm using on most of my cameras, it's no problem whatsoever. I can fully appreciate that the optical sensor and the sync port had to be cut from the iM20 to make it as small as it is. That's just extra hardware. That does pretty much limit it to just on-camera flash, and not even all cameras, because it's not compatible natively with cold shoe cameras. Yeah, you can get one of those PC sync adapters. It's extra hassle and whatever. Like, I really enjoyed using the iM30 on my Yashica Mat 124G. It's a leaf shutter flash, or leaf shutter camera. It's a TLR. Using flash with those is an amazing option, and the iM30 really suited that very well. But on the optical sensor side, how are you going to use this off camera? You're not, but it's still something that's just been cut, and whether or not that's going to be worthwhile as a compromise for the size, it's going to be a very personal question. Lastly, the whole USB Type-C or not debate will never end with these flashes, but it is fair to say that although it is very convenient to charge this thing, you can't just swap out the batteries, so if it dies during a day of shooting, it's gone. It's not something I think most people are going to encounter very often because it's decently powerful. You can crank the power down if you don't need the max power, and the battery capacity is very high. On the other side, this being a probably not user replaceable cell, you have to be thinking about long-term like battery capacity and the fact that that will eventually limit the ability to use this thing. But again, very high capacity. It's going to take a long time to get to that number of recharge cycles, but people brought this up in the iM30 comments, so I think it's worth mentioning as a possibility of something you might encounter down the line. So those are my thoughts on the Godox iM20 and the iM22 by extension. This is a very, very powerful, pretty much strictly on-camera flash, and for that kind of photography, I think it does an amazing job. It's absolutely tiny, it's very lightweight, it is significantly more powerful than competing micro flashes, and it's very affordable and it's built incredibly well. The compromises are that off-camera flash is very, very difficult. Using it with a cold shoot camera requires extra hardware, and just the fact that it is a bit less powerful than something like the iM30. I still think it's enough for most people, again, for that kind of photography, but yeah. As much as I've enjoyed using the iM20, I am going to stick with the iM30 as my own everyday carry for the extra features that it has. Again, lots of film cameras, lots of cold shoots. Using the PC sync port is a very nice feature there. Being able to use it wirelessly off camera is something beneficial to me. And the increased power level being, quite useful with the very low ISO films that I shoot a lot of the time, or the very narrow aperture lenses. That's something that personally suits my use case better, but that's not a normal use case by any stretch, let's be honest. The average person, again, wants to take a flash, put it on their camera and take pictures, and the iM20 and iM22 present amazing value with great power, amazing build quality, small size. What more do you realistically want? The only thing I could say would be nice to see would be a bit more transparency from Godox, like put the guide number of 8 in the manual, admit that it's less powerful than the iM30, but sell the small size and show that it doesn't really matter. I will be talking about the other flash that LetWell sent me relatively soon, the iA32, which has some very killer features. I was originally more excited for this thing, but the iM20 has really surprised me, even if it's not necessarily for me per se. So thank you again to LetWell for sending me both of these flashes in exchange for my reviews. Links to their Amazon stores are in the video description down below if you choose to purchase either of these or the iM30 flash. And thank you again for watching. But that's all I have to say for today, so stay safe and bye-bye for now. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Shaka1277 for new pictures every day. If you liked this video and enjoy what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month.